Ogerpon is one of the strongest and most unique Pokemon ever released, since it's essentially 4 Pokemon combined into one. So in this video, I want to give you guys my take on the best way to use Ogerpon, as well as break down which of the 4 Ogerpon forms might be best for you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with what a lot of players on social media, Twitter, etc. are speculating might be the most broken of all of the Ogerpon forms, and that is the Teal Mask form, which is the pure grass type Ogerpon. So I'm going to go ahead right off the bat and give you guys my hot take. I actually do not think this Ogerpon form is one of the best ones. I don't even think it's all that, insane like some players are speculating. So first, let's go ahead and talk about some of the mechanics that are leading players to kind of think that way. So the first is the fact that unlike the other 3 Ogerpon forms, the Teal Mask form can hold any item that it wants. It's not restricted to one of those 3 mask held items. It can choose, Focus Sash, Life Orb, Choice Band, Choice Scarf, Assault Vest. I mean, it has any choice of item that it wants. So it gives it some flexibility that the other Ogerpons don't have. The other is its ability, Defiant, which is an incredibly strong ability. We know how common Landorus Therian form is in the metagame, so the fact that you can, take advantage of opponents' Intimidates to give yourself an attack boost, and if you have a team full of a bunch of physical attackers, just the sight of Ogerpon in Team Preview might force the opponents to leave their Landorus behind and not even bring it to the battle, which can free up all of your other physical attackers. So Ogerpon definitely has a very unique niche there, but let's go ahead and talk about some of the downsides, which is why I think that this Ogerpon form might not actually be one of the best ways to use Ogerpon. So the first is its Terra type. It is locked into Terra Grass. It cannot go for a defensive terrestrialization or even like the other ones, which go for offensive terrestrializations, but they can still work in defensive ways because they're at least changing their types, or at least getting rid of one of their types. So this Ogerpon can't. It has a purely offensive Terra type, and so it feels like it could be a little bit high risk in exchange for high reward, right? Because if you get the Defiant boost off, and then if you terrestrialize it, you actually get a speed boost on top of that. So if you imagine, +1 attack thanks to Defiant, if you, get Intimidated, +1 speed from terrestrialization, and you get the boost to your grass type moves because of terrestrialization, and you have an item, which could be, Life Orb, or, who knows what item you end up opting for, it could just get out of hand real quick. The thing is, it just feels a little too risk reward for me. It feels like, if there is no Intimidate, there's probably better options for your grass type. I mean, it's pure grass. It doesn't have any way to protect itself. Obviously Spiky Shield protects it, but I mean, from terrestrialization, you don't have any way to kind of protect yourself in that way to give yourself the opportunity to launch an additional attack. And so I feel like I would just rather be using one of the numerous other good grass types that we now have access to. So, of course, Rillaboom, which has gotten buffed in the DLC, Amoonguss, which is just always really good, and then also Ogerpon, which is essentially 4 new grass types. So you have a few other grass types to choose from, and you even have Sinistra, which got released in the DLC as a more defensive grass type and supportive option as well. So there's a lot of competition for the grass type slot on your team, and I feel like the pure grass type Ogerpon just wouldn't be my choice for most teams. Now, like I mentioned, it has that niche with Defiant, with the speed boost for terrestrialization. You can give it whatever item you want, so there's some flexibility there. But I just don't think it's going to be as good, nearly as good, as a lot of players online seem to think. Now, maybe I'm wrong. If you think, that the grass type Ogerpon is going to be the best one, I mean, go ahead, let me know down in the comments. Maybe, maybe I'm wrong. There's definitely a chance. This is just purely theory. The metagame hasn't even started developing yet. So this is just my initial take here. But if I were to kind of give the pure grass type Ogerpon a try, the way I would use it would be, you need your grass type stab. Now this is going to depend a lot on the metagame, right? Do you need Woodhammer to replace IV Cudgel? I mean, that's going to depend a lot on damage calcs, which, there's no way to really, make that call yet because a metagame hasn't developed yet. So we don't know, is Woodhammer going to be better than IV Cudgel on this set? I would imagine IV Cudgel is going to be enough, but without running any kind of damage calcs, don't know for sure, but some kind of powerful grass type stab you definitely need. And then you have room for coverage moves. So you definitely want Spiky Shield. If you're going to run something like Life Orb or Focus Sash, items that kind of free you up to run a move like Spiky Shield, then you're definitely going to want to take advantage. But some of the coverage moves, because you really only have a strong grass type move here, so you would want something to hit the things that might be resisting it. So like Heatran, maybe you can run Low Kick for that 120 base power to hit Heatran and Roaring Moon. You could then run something like Knockoff to hit Golden Go. If you want to just run, Stomping Tantrum, that could hit Heatran and Golden Go, and then maybe you forget about Roaring Moon, or maybe you decide to forget about Golden Go and only go Low Kick. That could also then, if you opt for just one coverage move, could free you up to run something like Follow Me, which I think is a really good move for all of the Ogerpon forms, but I'll talk more specifically about which Ogerpon form I think will make the best use of Follow Me. But Follow Me, the reason it is so good, I think, on Ogerpon is the fact that it's very unique in that it's a grass type that can offer redirection. Whereas previously, right, if you tried to Rage Powder with like an Amoonguss against an opposing Amoonguss with Spore, it's not going to work, right? The Amoonguss can bypass Rage Powder thanks to its grass type and just Spore the ally Pokemon. However, if you Follow Me, Amoonguss has to have its Spore redirected into your grass type Ogerpon, and so it's just going to fail. So that's one of the really unique things about Ogerpon that I think makes Follow Me so viable on it. The thing is, though, stat-wise, it's definitely a more offensive Pokemon, but there's something to be said about offensive Pokemon. If they can fit a move like Follow Me into their moveset, I mean, it could definitely work, right? If you have a turn where maybe you don't want to, use an offensive move, then maybe you go for something like Follow Me. But for the grass-type Ogerpon, I really think you kind of just have to all in on offense. I mean, it's kind of the point of the set, right, with Defiant. And so I think for the item, you'd want to go for whether it's Life Orb to get damage boost, whether you go for Assault Vest to give yourself bulk, and then maybe you drop Follow Me and Spiky Shield and go for, like, I don't know, you put Knockoff back on, and then you run one of the other kind of moves that it gets access to, right? U-Turn could be one, Grassy Glide could even be one. That's going to give you some priority. If, Rillaboom is on the opposing team, then, maybe you could take advantage of it. I don't know. I mean, you have a few different options you could go for there in that last slot. But that's kind of how I would play the Defiant Grass-type Ogerpon. In terms of its stats, I mean, you definitely want to go offense. You'd want to outspeed Urshifu at the very least. I mean, that's going to be the benchmark speed-wise for, I think, every single one of the Ogerpon forms, because that's what makes it so unique. The grass types that are currently, or I guess previously in Regulation D existing, were either mediocre speed like Rillaboom or just really slow like Amoonguss. You didn't really have a grass type like this before, so I think you really want to take advantage of the fact that it can outspeed Urshifu. I think it's, 156 with like a neutral nature, so that could free up like Adamant Nature for you. That's going to outspeed neutral natured Urshifus. So any Urshifus that run like Adamant Nature, you would be able to outspeed all of them, unless they're like Scarf, of course. Or you could then opt for Jolly, well, not Lax, Jolly, and get up to 165, which is then going to outspeed any Jolly max speed Urshifus. Now, do you need that much speed? I don't know, but it's definitely an option. It's going to, again, depend on the metagame and what kind of Urshifus players are running. You could also just run max speed, especially if you have, Focus Sash or something. That could be an option. This could also really come into play for Flutter Mains. How many Flutter Mains are going to run below this speed amount? There might be some if they decide they want to invest more in bulk, then maybe you can actually outspeed some Flutter Mains. But I think with the release of Ogerpon, I think you're going to start to see Flutter Mains kind of prioritize hitting a speed above 178 here to outspeed Ogerpon. But, you know, we'll have to see depending on how the metagame develops. But you could start off with, you know, 156 in speed, outspeed any Adamant Urshifus. You know, invest in some attack. Again, it's going to come down to like damage calcs, how much you really need. You know, do you need max? Could you get away with less? You know, that's going to, you know, we'll optimize that as the format progresses. And then you can invest the rest just into bulk, however you really kind of see fit. Again, it's going to come down to doing damage calcs. You know, maybe there's some moves that Ogerpon could survive that you might want to, you know, EV train for. So that's kind of the gist of how I would run the grass type Ogerpon. So you have a lot of options item wise, and that's kind of the big thing with the pure grass type Ogerpon. So let's go ahead and move on from the grass type one. Let's talk about, I guess, the rock one that's next in the list here on Showdown. Let's talk about the rock one real quick. I won't go into as much in depth as I did the previous one, because most players seem to think that this is the worst one, and I'd probably tend to agree. I don't think the rock Ogerpon is really all that good, and a large reason is just I don't think rock is really all that good of a typing right now. Of course, defensively, it's not good, but that's mitigated by the fact that it has Sturdy, which is just a built-in focus sash, so I don't really mind the defensive aspect of the rock type as much. It's just the fact that as an offensive type, rock is actually really good. But in the metagame right now, I don't know if rock is really all that good. I think the one niche that the rock type Ogerpon is going to have, I think, is the fact that it can beat the fire type Ogerpon. So regardless of whether the fire type Ogerpon terastallizes into pure fire type or not, you can just kill it with your rock type Ivy Cudgel. So that's the one niche that I think this rock type Ogerpon has. And of course, Sturdy, the built-in focus sash. So you would just run an all-out offensive Ogerpon, you know, max speed, max attack. Whether you run Jolly or Adamant, I mean, that's going to be a meta call, similar to GM Pal. Some are Jolly, some are Adamant. So that's the thing with the rock type Ogerpon. Again, the rock type Ogerpon is still, you know, a very solid Pokemon. It's just that you have 3 other Ogerpons that you could opt for, and so by choosing the rock type one, it means you're forgoing any of the other Ogerpons. So that's the drawback of the rock type. It's the fact that if you use it, you can't use the other ones, which are, you know, I think going to be really, really good Pokemon. So that's the rock one. Again, if I'm using it, you know, Ivy Cudgel, Wood Hammer, Spiky Shield, and I don't know, maybe some kind of coverage move. I guess you would need knockoff to hit like Golden Go. Again, I don't know how common Golden Go will be. I'd expect decently common, but you would probably want some kind of coverage move here. But another option, and I'm going to talk about this more on some other sets, but I'll mention it here. Swords Dance is definitely an option on Ogerpon. So I guess what else does it really get that could be relevant here? Quick attack for some priority could be relevant. But that's generally, you know, how I would run. Again, you always have the option of Follow Me, like I mentioned, to redirect some spores. But that's the rock type Ogerpon. Don't really want to go too in depth with this one. Let's talk about the water one next. So the water one I think is really solid. I would say the water one is probably my number 2. I think the fire type one is going to be number 1 for me, so I'll save that one for last. Let's talk about the water one. The water grass typing is really solid. I mean, defensively, it's, you know, a very nice typing combined with the ability water absorb. I mean, water grass already quad resists Urshifu's surging strikes, but this is, again, one of the few Pokemon that can switch into that, and it's even going to heal from it if you switch it in onto an Urshifu surging strike. So water absorb, definitely a nice ability for that. Another thing too, I didn't mention this with the rock type one because I forgot, but this is news that just came out like within the last 24 hours. And I know when I made my tier list video for Ogerpon and all the other DLC Pokemon originally, we didn't know this yet, but the masks are actually really good. They give Ogerpon a 20% boost to all of its attacks. So it's not just its stab moves, it's every move. We've seen how good things like Mystic Water on Urshifu are, Mystic Water on Kyogre in formats past, Pixie Plate on Sylveon, on Fluttermane. We've seen those 20% single type boosting items be pretty good. And now we have one that gives the same 20% boost, but to all of its attacks. So it's like Life Orb, which is 30%, just, a little bit weaker, but it doesn't have the drawback of, lowering your HP 10% after each of your attacks. So the masks are actually really good. I know before we knew this, I was like, okay, well, you have the mask to change the type and get the extra stat boost when you terastallize, but you're not really getting anything else from the mask, right? The mask is just kind of, a useless item beyond those things. But it turns out that's not the case. The mask is going to boost Ogerpon's attacks, whether it terastallizes and gets the stat boost or not. So the masks, really, really good items, and that's another reason why I think the pure grass type one, like, we talk about the flexibility of the items, which is nice, but the masks are actually really good items, so you kind of want the mask, right? There's not really that many better items. If an item like this was available to every Pokemon, just a flat 20% to its damage with no drawback, I mean, that would be a really, really good item that a number of Pokemon would really want. So that's kind of my rant on the whole mask thing. Okay, back to the water type one. So this one I think is really interesting because it's kind of a hybrid between offense and defense. So what do I mean by that? So water and grass is actually really good coverage. So you could run a set like Ivy Cudgel and Wood Hammer, let's say, for the damage. One thing I do want to call out, I think you do need Wood Hammer to one-shot Urshifu. So as opposed to something like, where is it? Horn Leech. Horn Leech is not going to get the KO onto Urshifu. So if you do want that one shot onto Urshifu, you kind of have to go for Wood Hammer, even though it's, going to lower your HP. But Horn Leech is definitely an option for ones that maybe don't value one-shotting Urshifu. So you just want to call that out. Spiky Shield, you're probably going to want on all of the Ogerpons. But then you have a choice here, right? We talked about like coverage could be an option if you think Roaring Moon is going to be a problem. Sure. Go for low kick, or I guess if Roaring Moon is really the only problem, maybe you just go for like Play Rough. But nothing really deals with the grass water very well. It's just very nice offensive coverage. And if, Roaring Moon is the only thing that you really have to worry about, maybe just ignore it. Because I think the one thing that the water grass one can do well is follow me, especially with a much bulkier set. And, maybe sacrificing some attack investment to get some more bulk. Still enough speed maybe to outspeed the Adamant Urshifus. But you've got a lot more bulk, so you can take advantage of Follow Me. And these moves have really nice base power, so you're still going to do a very sizable chunk of damage anyway. So I really like the water grass type Ogerpon for those reasons. As, maybe some other options that I think could see some play. I mentioned this with the rock type one, but Swords Dance I think definitely has potential on Ogerpon. The reason for that is water grass, again, really nice typing. If you pair Ogerpon with something like Iron Hands, let's say, which can threaten Fake Out and really force the opponent to have to protect their Pokemon because you've got two Pokemon that deal lots of damage, you've got a Fake Out threat, that can give you the opportunity to set up a Swords Dance and just go to town. I mean, it's a really fast Pokemon naturally. It's got really high base power moves. In the case of Swords Dance, maybe you don't go with Wood Hammer. You could go with Horn Leech or Grassy Glide. Probably, Horn Leech seems to make a lot of sense with the Swords Dance set. And again, because you have Swords Dance, you could afford to drop some attack for more bulk. But the Water type one, you can Terastallize to get the increased damage on Ivy Cudgel, which is really nice. But it gives you the free +1 to your special defense, which on a Swords Dance set, I mean, that's really nice because Fluttermane's everywhere. If that's going to be one of the big problems, as well as some of the other kind of strong special attackers that exist right now, you can actually become really bulky. You're already really fast, and then Swords Dance giving you an attack boost. This Pokemon could really get out of hand. Now, is this going to be the optimal Ogerpon set? I don't know, but it's definitely an option. If you want to take the water type Ogerpon for a more offensive role on the team. But the Follow Me, I mean, obviously, Follow Me is a fantastic move, especially on a grass type, and especially with Water Absorb. You can protect your allies against Urshifus by, redirecting Surging Strikes, but they have to be careful because if that gets redirected into Water Absorb, that's not good. So that is Ogerpon. Again, EV spread, it's going to depend on your set if you're going for Swords Dance or Follow Me. That's going to change some of the IVs. But again, just like I mentioned before, you're going to want enough to outspeed Urshifu if you're going for Swords Dance. If you're going for Follow Me, maybe you could get away with running a lot less speed, depending on what kind of speed stat most Urshifus are going for, right? If Urshifus are, only in the 130s, well, okay, maybe you just try and speed creep them, or maybe you go all the way to outspeed Adamant Max, even though nobody's, not many people are running that. That's going to, again, come down to how the metagame develops, but then you might run enough attack to, get some KOs where needed. Don't really know where that's going to be. It would come down to damage calcs, but then you could also just run a bunch of defense, HP, get some defense in there. How's it really going to be optimized? We'll have to see. Of course, not this. We'd get up to 156 or more for speed creep purposes, but again, you're going to have ways to optimize. Do you want more attack, less bulk? Do you want more bulk and less speed and maybe less attack? Who knows? Again, it comes down to the metagame, but this is kind of the gist of how I would be running Ogerpon, as well as how to kind of think about getting an EV spread for it, depending on my set, whether I'm going more offensive or more defensive if I'm going for Follow Me. The water one, I think, could also have, Encore could be decent on a set like this, or on a, specifically the water type Ogerpon Encore could work. Leech Seed could work, but again, I think I'd probably kind of take advantage of the fact that it's got really nice attack and go for more damage here with Ivy Cudgel, Wood Hammer, as opposed to kind of stalling with Leech Seed. Okay. Let's talk about the last Ogerpon form, the Fire type one. So this is the one that I think is going to be the best. Its ability Mold Breaker isn't actually super relevant. It does allow you to hit Heatran, which could be pretty important. It means if you're not terastallized, Heatran can't really switch in, but it's important to know that once you terastallize, you lose this Mold Breaker, so then you lose the ability to hit Heatran with your Fire type moves as they become really strong. So that's a drawback, but Mold Breaker, not really super useful. It's a shame it didn't get, Defiant, but then it would be too good, probably. Okay, so the Fire type one locked into Terra Fire, which is fine because it's going to be an attacker thanks to its ability after terastallizing, which is going to give it a free +1 to its attack, which is insane. It's like a baby Zacian, and we saw how good Zacian was. The other thing too, the Fire type is actually, with Flutter Mane on every team, it's actually pretty relevant. And the one downside with Fire types is Urshifu Water being everywhere. But because you're naturally faster than Urshifu and you can just one-shot it with Wood Hammer, you don't, you can actually just deal with Urshifu as a Fire type, which is really unique. The other thing too, being a Grass type, again, you're immune to Spore. This is the case for all of them. But you can also just ignore Amoonguss, period, right? You can just target whatever is next to Amoonguss, or if you want, just threaten the KO on Amoonguss. But that's the other thing, right? If Amoonguss terastallizes into a water type, you can kill it with Wood Hammer. If not, you got your Fire type move, Ivy Cudgel. But the bypassing Amoonguss thing is also a really big part of Ogerpon. I guess I failed to mention that with the water type one. I think that's more relevant there, because we've seen like Urshifu, right? You want Safety Goggles as a water type to bypass Amoonguss. You want a Terra Grass to bypass Amoonguss, and it's a nice defensive option. We've seen that with like Dondozo and Urshifu. But that's the thing with these Ogerpons is they can just naturally bypass Amoonguss. But the Fire type one, you can just kill Amoonguss, whether it terastallizes to a water type or not. So, but it's still a nice kind of tool to have where you can just ignore Amoonguss. Because this is more of an offensive Pokemon, Follow Me is definitely still an option, but you can kind of get away without using it. Swords Dance is also an option. It can get really out of hand at +3, but it might be a little overkill. You might not need the +3. Substitute is an option. Similarly to I mentioned with the water type one, you can take advantage of like fake outs or forcing protects and just get a substitute up, which this one can definitely force because when you terastallize, it just threatens insane damage. So if you predict a protect, you can just set up a free substitute, which would also protect you from intimidate if you get it up beforehand. But you could also just go for coverage. Low kick, I think, is nice to hit Heatran after you terastallize, even before. And then it can also threaten Roaring Moon, which is really nice as well. So, and then of course Spiky Shield for the last is probably how I would run it. I would, again, this slot, whether you go coverage with low kick, whether you go Swords Dance to get extra greedy, or if you go for a substitute, which is a nice middle ground of, you know, being able to take advantage of opponents that protect without just, you know, kind of Swords Dancing, but then something comes in and you're at +3 attack, but something's faster and threatening a one-hit KO on you. But at least you'd have a substitute to protect yourself, so it's kind of a middle ground. So those are some options. Follow Me is, again, still an option as well, because redirecting Spore as a grass type is always going to be good. In terms of how I would use this Ogerpon, it's going to be very similar to all of them. You're going to want a speed stat that can outspeed Urshifu, so whether you go 156 Adamant or 156 Jolly, or even less EVs with Adamant Nature, it's going to be up to the player and up to the metagame. How much attack investment you use, that's going to be up to damage calcs, which, you know, we can't really optimize because a metagame hasn't developed yet, so we don't really know what to calc against. But to get started, you know, you can run a decent amount of speed. Just outspeed every Urshifu, why not? Because if you terastallize to a pure fire type, maybe you just want to be safe than sorry and outspeed some Jolly max speed Urshifus. You know, get a bunch of attack investment there and have a little bit of bulk left over. This kind of set could definitely work. And then, you know, go with like low kick or whatever. Seems like something you want to try out in this slot. But that's kind of the way you could use it in the early metagame. But again, as the metagame develops, this is going to get way more optimized. This is the case for every Pokemon. The EVs at the beginning, it's not the most important. You just go with something that makes sense and you adjust from there. So that is kind of my breakdown on how to use each of the Ogerpon forms. Kind of giving you guys my rankings. I think the fire type one is the best. I think the water type one is close and also really good. The grass type one, I say there's probably a big gap between the fire and water and the grass one. Maybe I'm proven wrong there. That's my hot take. And then the rock one, similarly to the grass one, but a little bit worse. I don't think the rock one is all that good, but there's a niche for every single one of them, so I would expect them all to see decent play. But the fire and the water, to me, seem like the best ones. The last thing I wanted to cover, this has already been decently long, but the last thing I want to talk about is kind of the impact on the metagame that Ogerpon might present. So I've mentioned this when talking about the coverage moves. I think one Pokemon that could really see a rise in usage is Roaring Moon. So not only has it gotten access to Knockoff in the DLC, to boost its damage and give it a nice secondary effect there to kind of support the team a little bit. But it resists fire, water, and grass, so it can resist multiple of the Ogerpon forms. And it's often commonly seen with booster energy and terraflying acrobatics. So it can become faster than the Ogerpons and turn into a flying type and one-shot them. So that is, you know, something that I think Roaring Moon, you know, it might see a little bit more usage than it saw in previous regulations. And it already saw decent usage in Regulation D. It might see even more in Regulation E, thanks to Ogerpon. Not to mention the fact that it can set up Tailwind, which could be nice not only for your own Ogerpon, but to outspeed, you know, opposing Ogerpon, since it is a pretty fast Pokemon. So Roaring Moon is one Pokemon I would expect to see some more of, thanks to Ogerpon. Another thing is some of these Tailwind teams. We've seen in Regulation D, like the Tornadus, Urshifu, Fluttermane, Rillaboom, Choice Band Arcanine, Chiempao, you know, some have even had like Landorus, or Chi-Yu or Heatran over the Arcanine in the fire type slot. We've seen, you know, a number of different combinations there. one thing that we might see might be an addition of this fire type Ogerpon to those kind of teams. And as we used to see Tornadus have like Rain Dance on those teams to power up Urshifu, we might start to see Sunny Day as manual weather on the Tornadus instead, as a way to power up Ogerpon and Fluttermane. So that's something we might see. That's kind of my take on how the metagame might react to Ogerpon. So Roaring Moon, manual Sun. I mean, honestly, maybe even Ninetales usage. I mentioned in the tier list video, I think Ninetales usage might go up. It's nice with Fluttermane, but who knows if this fire type Ogerpon is just bonkers. Maybe we see just dual fire type and we see Ninetales powering up Ogerpon as well. I've seen clips on Twitter of the fire type Ogerpon with like Champao on the field or Sun on the field, and it's just one-shotting Iron Hands of all things, which is insanely bulky. So that this thing can just put out absurd damage. So that's gonna do it for the Ogerpon video. It's been, I don't know, almost half an hour maybe. But hopefully it was informative for you guys. Hopefully it was interesting. Let me know down in the comments, what do you guys think about Ogerpon? Which form are you most excited to use, and which do you think will be the best in Regulation E? But that's going to do it for me, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.